friends. All right, so welcome to Scaffolding Techniques, Building a Blueprint for Success. My name is Steph Baxter, and I am on the training and consultation team with IU 13 as a special education consultant. And my initiative is Inclusive Practices, which involves a wide array of different training topics. And this is one that is often embedded into a lot of the different trainings that I do. So I'm hoping that you can all take something away from this today, either as a teacher or as a consultant or as an administrator who is supporting teachers with supporting all the needs of all of their students. So first things first, we have some housekeeping that we need to go over here. We are actually providing these different sessions that we're recording as webinars as part of a series that the IU 13 is facilitating to provide responsive, high quality, focused professional learning experiences that highlight practical and actionable strategies for accelerating learning. So the topics and content within this virtual professional learning series were developed as the result of feedback and supports requested by IU 13 member school districts, evolving research, and then data that was collected on pandemic recovery. So the Pennsylvania Department of Education Guidance and the statewide PAIU network expertise, they were all involved with coming up with different topics that would be able to continue to support our learners and our teachers. So we have several accelerated learning components, and these are within the Pennsylvania Department of Education's accelerated learning framework. Number one is high quality academics. So the purpose of this component is to define the instructional changes that are needed and foster a culture of data-informed decision-making to ensure that every learner has access to those instructional strategies, the materials, and the supports needed to successfully engage with master grade level content. The second component is supportive learning environments. The purpose of this component is to ensure that we're providing a safe and inclusive space for learning so our students can form positive and supporting relationships, and to support learners and staffs to mentally and socially recover. Number three is healthy systems connection. And please excuse me a second while I let someone in here. The healthy systems component focuses on engaging a diverse group of stakeholders within the educational community to get that deeper understanding of the school system and to be able to utilize the continuous improvement process and the tools to address systemic needs that include staffing, which we know we're in a major staffing crisis right now, technology, and scheduling. And all of those are to create the conditions for accelerated learning. And then finally, we have the system of scaffolded supports, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. And this component provides a continuum of evidence-based academic, behavioral, and emotional supports that are aligned with student needs. So today, our webinar topic falls under the system of scaffolded supports. My learning goal for you today is that you, by the end of this session, will be able to define scaffolding, but then take it further to be able to apply scaffolding strategies to enhance learning for students. Whether you are in the classroom providing the instruction, or whether you are supervising teachers providing that instruction. Knowing different scaffolding strategies, what to look for, how to implement them, will really provide tools that all students will be able to access to enhance their learning. Below, there is a tiny URL. You can access a copy of this Google Slides presentation by clicking that link. Additionally, for more information, you can visit the active link website right here, the IU13's Accelerated Learning website. And another very important reminder, if you are wanting to get Act 48 credit for this training, you need to participate for the length of the training and be in attendance for the length of the training. And then you would complete the Act 48 evaluation in the frontline system. So let's talk about the accelerated learning system. Even as school leaders work to try to create the conditions to bring back some level of in-person instruction this school year, they're already planning for the new year ahead with a focus on new challenges, accelerating student learning to mitigate any learning gaps that might exist, as well as emotional health concerns. So in order to offer support, we're turning our focus to these critical needs and the opportunities to offer a new phase of the roadmap, accelerated learning through an integrated system of support. And this is a really nice graphic that just illustrates. So let's look at this here. With our orange ring, we've got the cycle of continuous improvement. We've got the mindset and the opportunities that are created to assess the ongoing needs, to have our teachers and those of you who supervise looking at new strategies so that we're continually making adjustments to our practice. We're also focusing on that academic achievement, and even more critical now than ever, the social and emotional well-being of all involved. We want to make sure that we are setting up healthy systems of supports and conditions so that everyone feels safe in their learning environment. And then down here, this is the section we're going to be talking about today, designing a system of scaffolded supports. We want to provide evidence-based academic, behavioral, social, and emotional supports that are aligned with student needs. So we're going to dive deeply into that today. So instructional scaffolding, we're going to define it, but then we're also going to give opportunities for you to participate. And I'll have a link on the next slide that actually has a Padlet where you're able to jot down any questions or any thoughts that you have as you're listening to what I'm saying about scaffolding. And then finally, takeaways that you have. However, I also encourage you, if you have a question that needs an immediate response, to go into the chat and to ask your question through the chat, even if it's a scenario. If you feel more comfortable waiting till the end of the training when the recording has stopped and you want to participate by asking your questions during the Q&A, that is fine as well. So let's talk about instructional scaffolding. This is a process through which the teacher adds supports for students in order to enhance learning and aid in the mastery of tasks. So much like we provide scaffolding when we are working on new construction projects, we can implement scaffolding for our students in the classroom. And as the students gradually gain back some of that responsibility, the scaffolding can be titrated, much like it is with a construction project. So with this process, the teachers are going to do modeling. They're going to do a lot of direct and explicit instruction. They might demonstrate how to solve a problem and then step back and then offer support as needed. And we'll go over that a little bit more detail in a few minutes. So the theory behind this is that when students are given the support that they need while they're learning something new, they stand a better chance of using that knowledge independently. So here is the slide that I promised, and this is the active participation engagement slide. So if you wish to engage with the Padlet, you can either use your camera on your phone or copy this link here below. And you also will have the link here in a few minutes that you'll see to the training to be able to access the Padlet as an active link in the Google Slides. So when we are participating in scaffolding, we systematically build on students' experiences and knowledge as they are learning new skills. So think about your students. It's important, it's very, very important to have a good understanding of background knowledge. What does our student or do our students know about the concept or the content that we're going to teach? What do they already know? That's where you often see a lot of our KWL charts come into play, because we want to make sure that we are building on what they already know. Additionally, we need to know the background knowledge, because oftentimes that is prerequisite knowledge for more difficult skills that they will eventually work on. So if you want to give an example, we could say, well, we're not going to teach somebody how to do a backflip prior to teaching someone in gymnastics how to do a forward roll. Just like in the classroom, we're not going to ask students to read a passage without ever giving them any instruction in decoding or ensuring that they know the vocabulary that they are going to be interacting with in the passage. An example of the opposite of scaffolding a lesson would be something like saying to students, I want you to read this 9-page science article, write a detailed essay on the topic that it explores, and turn it in by Wednesday. Oh, yikes. There is no safety net with that. There's no parachute. They're just left on their own, left to their own devices to try to figure out how are they going to manage that task. And that's where something obviously we don't want to do. We want to be able to scaffold and provide those supports so students are able to access their learning. Supports are temporary. Just like it is for a construction project, we eventually want to release that responsibility back to the student. As students master assigned tasks, then the supports are gradually removed. And this isn't just for academics. Think about applying this behaviorally. When I taught emotional support, I had students that had lots of built-in breaks, or maybe they had some behavior health rehabilitation supports. And as the students, after they were explicitly and directly taught those skills or those coping mechanisms, we would gradually pull back those supports. The behavior health rehabilitation hours would be reduced, and the student wouldn't need as frequent amount of breaks as they had needed before, when they were more at the acquisition level of learning those coping strategies. The same thing takes place with academics. So when a student might need some more intensive support, say as in working under multi-tiered systems of support structure, they might be really needing some intense support at a tier 3 level. But as the gap is closed and students are able to strengthen those areas which used to be deficits, they could gradually move back into tier 2. And then hopefully the goal is to move into the tier 1, which would be the whole classroom. Think of teaching a child how to walk. First, a parent holds the child up when they're learning, and the child's feet are barely touching the floor as he mimics walking. And then slowly the child is allowed to support more and more of his own weight because he's getting stronger. And then next you see the child holding himself up against a coffee table or the couch, while he waddles along, holding on with that support. And then finally, the child is ready to take steps. Maybe it's a parent's hand that he's holding, and or the parent might just be a few inches away in case the child falls. But soon enough, we know the child's walking and then eventually running on his own. So like the parents in this example, we as teachers or educators are teaching new tasks or supporting the teaching of new tasks. Initially, having that complete control and supporting our students fully. And then gradually, when students are ready, support is withdrawn until the students are able to stand on their own. So what we know about scaffolding and when it's necessary, we need to scaffold when we're teaching new tasks with multiple steps. When the content is new or the task is new, we must scaffold. Multi-steps often cause students lots of difficulty. So we need to break it down, or in other words, chunk different tasks that the students might have to do, or any kinds of activities that they might be participating in. We also need to scaffold in the teaching of instructional strategies. Next, when students are not ready to implement strategies independently, we must scaffold. And then finally, when students need assistance with attending to concepts or to attend to during each step process along the way. So it's a lot of chunking. It's a lot of doing the direct and explicit teaching, doing the modeling, and giving a lot of that support right off the bat, and then gradually reducing it. Scaffolding is most useful for teaching new tasks or strategies with multiple steps. And any student at any grade level, regardless of cognitive ability, can benefit from instructional scaffolding. Oftentimes, when we think of the term scaffolding, we think of the students that have lots of academic or lots of behavioral deficits, but really it is beneficial for all students. And scaffolding can really be applied to any academic task. And when you plan in a proactive manner, you can almost anticipate barriers ahead of time for which you may need to implement scaffolding. Back to my slide, and it should say 2 critical elements to consider when using instructional scaffolding, and we can't stress these enough. Modeling is such a critical part of scaffolding. So the teacher needs to make sure that they're modeling and demonstrating each step in the task or the strategy that's being used for whatever skill or concept is being taught. And that strategy should also be modeled several times. I found just in teaching CPI, those of you who have ever been trained know that we do the active portion and we have to have 3 chairs lined up. I found that I needed to do direct modeling of how I wanted the 2 lines of individuals to line up to practice the physical engagement, and then to even model how to set the 3 chairs up. Because when we're not explicit enough with what we want people to do, whether it be students, young students, or adult learners, they're not maybe going to implement or do what we're thinking that we told them to do. So being very explicit with that. Modeling and repetition really helps the students understand how they're going to perform each step. And then it also gives them the understanding of why each step is so important. Think about when you're teaching math problem solving. I had students struggle with word problems all the time because it involves reading, right? But it also involves a step-by-step process. First, we need to look at the problem and understand what the problem is even asking us. Then we need to make a plan. What operation am I going to use to solve this problem? Then we need to solve it and then finally check it. Sometimes our students need that hand-holding and step-by-step to make it through all of those. And when we see their work on their paper and we have them describe or talk about what they did to get where they ended up, then we can do an error analysis and hone in on that specific part of that skill that they missed. I love working with the error analysis when doing the word problems, but I also frequently use something that I called think alouds. I would model a think aloud when I was doing instruction. I used it a lot in my math interventions because then I could hear the train of thought that my students were using, and then I could determine where did they go wrong. And that way, I didn't have to rehash the entire problem. I could praise and say, wow, you got the first two steps. That's great. This is where you hit a little bit of a road, like a road bump, but that's okay. This is how you can fix that. So that's very helpful as well. We also want to use the modeling because knowing how and why leads the students' successful performance of the task or the strategy. They need to know what's in it for me. Why do I need to know this? And then the other critical element to consider when using instructional scaffolding is the practice. Practice, practice, practice. Explicit instruction tells us that we should use the I do, the we do, the you do model. So we want to do the I do, which is that modeling, but then we're going to gradually release that responsibility to our students for the guided practice. So the students are either individually or as a group going to practice the skills that we taught. And they need to have that opportunity to be able to work collaboratively with the teacher, which would be the guided practice. And then additionally with their peers, like we just saw in that video, maybe for some of the we do it together. So that's the optional step. You do the I do, the we do, guided practice, the y'all do, the do it with your peers, and then the independent practice, you do it alone. And then we assess and then adjust our instruction accordingly. So this is an example with which you might have experienced in your own lives. So thinking about teaching a child how to ride a bike. This was not an easy task for me my first go round. Much easier my second go round, but my son was adamant that he was not going to learn to ride a bike. So an example of how to ride a bike with scaffolding would be, I would sit on my bike, I would do the demonstration, the direct modeling of how to ride the bike. And then we would get him on his own bike and start out with the training wheels so that we would keep that balance there for him, right? Then gradually you raise those training wheels up a little bit so that if he were to go to one side or the other, he would still have a little touch of balance. And then once they get that balance under control and you're ready to remove the training wheels, you still might do some kind of guidance like the back of the seat, or like in this picture here with the hand on this child's back, and steadying him with the hand and walking beside. And only after those steps happen do we let the child then go off on their own. If we chose to teach riding a bike without scaffolding, we would just explain how to do it, put the child on the bike and give him a shove. Now, what would the result of that be? Probably not a very desirable result unless they've been doing a balance bike since they were 1 year old or something like that, which is the new big thing, right? The balance bikes and learning how. But that's not going to give us the result that we want in most situations. So we can scaffold a couple different ways. We can talk about content scaffolding. So we want to contrive the motivation. We want to engage our students so that they are the best learners that they can be. We want to start with the easy steps that are going to help the students feel success and then build on that momentum. So when we talk about scaffolding content, we're going to use familiar or highly interesting content. A lot of times when I was doing remediation in reading, we would use high interest level stories and low readability. Have you heard of those? So high interest, low readability. So the students could still get really into the topic or the concept but it was at a decoding level that was instructional for them. So teachers often find that it's much easier to teach a new strategy to students when they begin with familiar content. Makes sense, right? What's something we already know about? Let's reel them in that way, and then I can go on with introducing that new content. We want to use the easy content. So for instance, to teach reading comprehension strategy, you might start with an easier text. Maybe you're sitting and you're wanting to teach a new reading strategy, but you use a picture book. I'm telling you, kids in middle school and high school, some of them still like to be taught a concept in a fun way like that by using a picture book, because you're not worried about the readability level of the text. You're worried about the engagement and teaching the actual strategy. So once you teach that with an easier text, then you can gradually increase the level of difficulty once the student becomes confident and that you see that they're proficient with that strategy that you're teaching. Finally, you want to start with the easy steps. So the teacher is going to perform and model the more difficult steps of a task, and then let the students do those easier steps. Then you will eventually do that gradual release of responsibility. All right. We can also scaffold tasks. I would say that a lot of my experience in my career has been content and task scaffolding. The teacher needs to begin by being very, very specific about the steps in the task or whatever instructional strategy is being taught. And remember, the same goes for academics as behavior. Teachers are going to model the steps in the task and doing what I described a few minutes ago, that verbalizing the thought processes for the students. So it's my think aloud. I would think aloud when reading books to students. I would think aloud when manipulating objects for math instruction. Think aloud when I am trying to determine the key details that I need to focus on in a passage. I would think aloud when using a graphic organizer to model how to organize one's thoughts for a writing activity. Behaviorally, I would do a lot of thinking aloud about choice making. So we would start with students and talk about, okay, right now you have choices to make. The expected choice would be to do this, and these are the consequences that come out of that expected choice. And the unexpected choice would be this, and consequences that could come out of that choice. So even thinking about behavior and feelings, I do a lot of zones of regulation training. We scaffold that as well for our students. Then the teacher's role is to be directly observing the student's performance and the checking for that understanding. So if the student needs additional scaffolding, then they can coach the student through that situation. And then finally, teachers must scaffold by continuing to model the steps or procedures until we see proficiency, so that independence performance is achieved. Something else that we can scaffold is material. I used a lot of this as well. This would involve written prompts, cues to help students perform some kind of task or use of a strategy. I had so many math templates, I wouldn't have time to share them all. For any of the elementary math practices or skills that you could think of, I probably had a template for it. I had lots of visual supports with my students. We used visual schedules. I had behavioral point sheets with icons on that were preferred by students. I had cue sheets, little reminders, bring it on down when you're regrouping and you have a 2-digit sum, and whoop, there it is for the other number that goes over to the tens place. So I had little verbal cues, I had visual cues. We had lots of graphic organizers, checklists. I had them for academic and behavioral as well. So having students have some kind of support where they can check off what they've completed or the steps that they need to take. So those guided examples are very, very helpful for students. So once we've decided what type of scaffolding we need to be using, whether it's the material, the content, or the task, we want to make sure we're also skilled at that error detection and correction. We can't stress enough that any kind of feedback that's given to students must be specific. And we want to make sure we're also highlighting all the things they're doing well as well. So for every corrective, we want to still be giving 5, that a boys, or you did a great job with this. I really liked how you you highlighted a word that you weren't sure about and you looked it up in your electronic dictionary. Teachers have to model also for students how they go about detecting an error. And a lot of times that can be done with that think aloud process. They also need to make sure that they eventually learn to self-correct. Think about when you first started learning how to write any kind of written response. Did you have someone edit your writing or look over it and help you with word choice or grammar or the way you structured your paragraphs? So modeling something like that and teaching somebody how to go through the correction process and the editing is just one example of something you might do to teach error detection and correction. Teachers also can be really helpful by modeling that stuckness. So if I were to get stuck, and I model this kind of stuff with behavior all the time, but you can do it in so many different ways with academics. They can simulate getting stuck. I don't know where to go next in this problem. I've got these first 2 steps, and teaching students how to talk themselves through that. We need our students to understand, again, going back to one of the principles of the accelerated learning webinars that we're doing, that it is okay to make mistakes and that they're in a safe place for learning to take place. I model all the time the mistakes that I make for students, and they are the first to call you out on it. Let me tell you, Mrs. Baxter, you said, I thought you said this yesterday. You're right. I made a mistake. It happens. So as long as they're understanding why they made the mistake and the steps that they need to take to correct that for the future, then we are good to go with that. Here are a few items of scaffolding, some examples you can use. So cue cards, checklists, steps in the process to complete tasks, demonstrations, completed models of problems, showing students this, if you had a rubric that was a 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 being what you were looking for. This writing piece right here is a 4. This is a 3. This is a 2. This is a 1, so that they know what to look for. Having any type of rubric that you're using or expectations for the assignment be very clear and explicit, so then the students can check off once they look at their finished product before turning it in to see if they have met all those requirements. Additionally, taking a complex skill and then teaching it in manageable, but also logical chunks. How am I going to chunk this so this makes sense for the learner, going from the most basic skill up through the most difficult skill? We also want to provide hints and prompts as students begin to practice a new skill. Remember, we've got to follow Anita Archer and Charlie Hughes's explicit instruction of the I do, we do, you do, when we're requiring mastery and when students are learning new content. We also want to select examples and problems that progress in complexity, and then finally sequencing skills so they build on each other. Some additional scaffolding tips: give time to talk. I love having dialogue about the learning. We want to clear up any misconceptions that there could be about the learning of a particular skill or concept so that we get them out of the way right off the bat. Examples versus non-examples. A lot of times people say, don't teach the non-examples. They're going to teach the students the wrong thing. But really, they need to see what a non-example is so that they can make sure that they're not including that in their example list. That's also a part of explicit instruction. You want to pre-teach vocabulary, practice defining it, practice breaking it down into its parts, if it has a prefix or a suffix. Also, using that word in context is super critical for students. We also want to pause, ask questions, pause, and review. I think I have a graphic a little bit down the line here that talks about chunking of your instruction and how often to check for formative assessments. If I don't, I'll mention that at the end here because I know I'm running out of my time. We also want to give any mini lessons that could be helpful before launching into the bigger lesson. So if you think of little mini lessons for very specific skills within the overall content, those can be helpful. And then describing concepts in multiple ways. So this really lends itself to some universal design for learning, which I'll show you here in a minute. And here is this 10 to 10 that I was just talking about. We talked about chunking. I've linked the owlteacher.com scaffolding strategies here. Just gives a nice long list of different scaffolding strategies. Front loading, content specific vocabulary, giving time to practice, and the good rule of thumb of chunking your instruction. Teach for 10 minutes, check for 2. Teach for 10 minutes, check for 2. When you have those frequent formative assessments built in, you are really going to know the direction that you're going to take for the remainder of your content. We talked a little bit already about graphic organizers. You can use sentence starters. Here's from the video, coaching students to help each other. And then set the students up for success by describing the purpose of the assignment, provide the concrete examples of the learning goals that they're expected to achieve. What's my goal? How are you going to get here? And show me you learned what I set out to teach you. Directions have to be clear. We're going to show exemplars of quality work and then give them that rubric, like I mentioned a few minutes ago. When you plan in a universally designed way, you provide flexibility with how you're going to engage students, how you're going to present your content, and how you're going to show them that they have learned what you set out for them to learn. This reduces barriers from the get-go. So we are doing very purposeful, proactive planning with our lessons to ensure that we understand the needs of our students and that we reduce or remove any barriers that they may experience throughout our teaching. And this is just a very scratch the surface basic of the 3 principles of UDL that we don't have time to go into in depth. However, I'd like to turn your attention to a Schoology course if you're interested that Tom Esposito and I created that is all about universal design for learning to dive more deeply into it. And that's available on Frontline as well. So we need our students to become engaged in their learning. We need them to be motivated to continue, and it's got to be tied to their interests. That's where knowing your students is so critical for planning your instruction. That is the why. Why are we learning this? Connect it to them. It gives it value. Next, we're providing multiple means of representation. We need our students to understand the what. How can I, as a teacher, present content to you in a variety of ways that's going to reach you? If I need to get out manipulatives and be more concrete, that's what I'm going to do. If you can do the abstract method, that's what I'm going to do. So it's meeting our students where they are, not asking our students to adapt to our instruction. That's our job as educators. And then finally, multiple means of action and expression. We want our students to be able to make cross-curricular connections and engage in their learning. So this is the how of the learning. How can they show us? Could they give an oral presentation? Could they write an essay about it? Could they do a play and act it out? Could they record something, make an iMovie trailer? Whatever you want to offer them, if it's multiple means and it reaches their interest levels and it's the best way for them to show you what they've learned, then offer it. All right. So I have the Padlet QR code here again. So what we want to talk about, and I'll stop the recording here in a few seconds. I just need to go over a few other slides that are required. But thinking about, let's reflect on this. What scaffolding will you add to your teaching practices or look for from your supervisees as a result of your learning? If you don't supervise and you don't teach, but you're a consultant, how could this help you in a coaching role that you're in? So I'm going to go through just a few more slides and then I'm going to open it up. So here is my email that you can access. Remember, the tiny URL is on this as well. And those are all going to be put into the accelerated learning bank, I think, and that's how you're supposed to access those. But if you have more questions about that, email me and I will get that to you. Some references. And then here are some additional PDE accelerated learning resources that you can peruse. And then finally, the last slide is just the cover page again. So let me go up here to my tools that keep trying to disappear on me and stop the recording.